Roster rumors aplenty. One that gets added to the list is incredibly intriguing, right, to say the least. We've seen Reddit posts, we've seen Twitter threads constantly talking about how there could be a team brewing up in Atlanta. And like I said, according to these reports, according to these claims, Atlanta is eyeing up the roster of Simp, aBeZy, Priestahh, Celium, and Major Maniac ahead of franchising. Now, based on the reactions, like I said, from both Twitter and Reddit, this one's very interesting for a multitude of different reasons, right? One of those primary reasons is because they've got Simp, right? They've got the player who has made such an insane kind of run throughout his pro career, and it was in 5 months, right? He was a pro, at least so far throughout Black Ops 4, for 5 months. And let's go and cover a few things that he accomplished in that short period of time. In his first ever Open event, when he played under FC Black, he won the Fort Worth Open. That was kind of one of his first ever kind of major events. So to kind of go to that one is somewhat interesting and somewhat intriguing. Along with Fort Worth, he later went on to play for United, obviously. In his first major event, he happened to finish second in London. Later went on to finish top 6 in Anaheim. Went on to become the first place team in United's Pro League division. They also went on to win Pro League playoffs, and then coming into his first ever champs, wins it all and becomes the MVP. So 1 minor, 2 major titles, one of those being a ring, and in the process won MVP and made it look somewhat easy, to be honest. Like, we were seeing some moments, and he was having some incredible performances. We talked about his dominant series and dominant search and destroy versus, more specifically, units. His consistency as a player ever since he was added toward the United roster was incredible. It really was. So the fact that he's moving on to this team, in many eyes, and mine as well, to be considered the best player right now in Call of Duty, and then you throw in the fact that he's also got one of his teammates. He's got his dynamic duo. One of the Tiny Terrors is joined alongside by the other in aBeZy, one of the best entry SMGs in the world. Now, that is scary, right? That's very scary. If you were just to tell me that those two guys are rumored, I would say, okay, they've got something fantastic brewing, at least for now. And then you also have more players to talk about, right? Next, you look at Priestahh, what I label as the Swiss Army knife of Call of Duty Esports. He won 2 titles with 100 Thieves. He ran every single role that was possible in Black Ops 4 and looked consistent and great pretty much every single time that he swapped roles, from being the main AR to being a slaying Maddox, and then obviously transitioning into a SOG role. He looked fantastic and had a big hand in changing the entirety of the culture at 100 Thieves whenever he joined the organization along with Crowder. Now, then you look at Celium and Major Maniac. I didn't think it could get better. It possibly could, right? Respectfully, had fantastic years, right? Fantastic years for their respective organizations. At certain points, they led their rosters to high placements outside of champs, right? Major Maniac was one of the most consistent, was a part of one of the most consistent teams in the world in Gen G. And Celium, like I said, had some phenomenal points throughout the year where a lot of people were looking at him to perform, and when they needed him to, he was there, and oftentimes led them to the best placement that they could kind of muster up. So you look at that and you think, wow, right? You look at this particular team and you say, this team has a crazy amount of talent, and then you realize they've also got a ton of chemistry as well. If things couldn't even get any better, you look at this team, like I said, they've got talent, but they've also worked with each other somewhat in the past, right? Just to label a few different times where these guys have had experience with each other. Celium and Simp have been playing with each other for years. They were on the EU Cadets with each other. During that time, they played against a ton of different guys, one of them being Major Maniac, right? A very well-known search and destroy player himself, was on a number of different rosters, played with guys like Teddy Rex and Mutex, and on rosters like Lethal Gaming, kind of in his come-up in World War II. And like I said, he played against these guys all the time. Also, guys, I should say, this mixture played against each other a ton. Like, we throw in aBeZy, we throw Priestahh in there to a certain extent. All of these guys have met up in a ton of online tournaments, search and destroy tournaments for years. So one thing that's also interesting is how quick each of their come-ups have been, right? Not only do they have skill, not only do they have chemistry, but they also have a similar upbringing in terms of where their careers looked at pretty much a title ago to where they sit right now. So in World War II, let's go back a little bit. Let's talk about a few of these players, right? When it came down to World War II, just a title ago, Major Maniac, like I mentioned earlier, on Lethal Gaming, he was trying to prove he wasn't just some search and destroy star. That's when a lot of the conversation was brought up in the Call of Duty esports community, saying, hey, could we see search and destroy stars, labeled at the time, come into the pro scene and actually, cause some damage? And obviously, Major Maniac was one of those guys who instantly started to make that case. Next, Simp, right? He was proving himself in constant online tournaments. He was waiting until he could turn the age of 18. I personally was casting over him all the time, and it was just so thrilling to watch his gameplay, the way that he could take over search and destroy maps. And when he finally got to put that sniper rifle to work, we saw the damage that he could do, at least in Black Ops 4. Like I said, I had the ability to watch that in World War II, and it was phenomenal, and it obviously has carried over very well to the pro rosters. aBeZy, right, was playing in online tournaments as well with guys like Tupac Thuglord on teams like Wildcard. Later got drafted onto Enigma 6, which was great for his career, so he was kind of in the midst of wanting to prove off his skill as well, but he instantly went from, more of an amateur-like team in Wildcard to instantly getting picked up by E6 and obviously carried on to E-United at the start of Black Ops 4. And then lastly, Celium, right? Same kind of situation as Simp. They were on the EU Cadets. They were both waiting to turn the age of 18 and was waiting for the next title to come inbound, grinding online tournaments, trying to win as many search and destroys as possible, and really just wanting to try to improve ahead of their rookie seasons. And like I said, there's a lot to like about this team. Really, there is, right? If this roster were to come about, there's a lot to like about this team. You have a young, fast core, a ton of potential with a lot of pre-existing chemistry. I think their search and destroy would look fantastic just off the names on paper. I think that's somewhat fair to say. They have a terrifying, no pun intended, SMG frontline in Simp and aBeZy, who have a ton of experience together, and so much so that they actually won a world championship with each other as well. You have, like I said, the Swiss Army knife, right, in Priestahh, the guy who can run multiple positions if necessary. If ARs start to become somewhat of an issue, it's nice because you've got some flexibility, not just in Priestahh, but also with Celium, who has proved from time to time he can roll with the main Maddox, at least in Black Ops 4, can run with a slang AR type position, or he can also play the main AR role as well. Now, this is a common opinion from a lot of people at the moment, because we talk about the positives. Let's go and talk about a few of the maybe issues that this team could be facing off against, because by no means is this team going to be perfect, right? Well, where are a few of their issues that could be lying just under the rug? The first thing that a lot of people have looked upon, and myself included, is leadership, right? Who brings that in for this team? By definition, the most experienced player on this team happens to be Priestahh, who has been playing since Infinite Warfare. Hasn't been playing for all that long in comparison to how you would compare maybe a lot of other veterans to be on teams or IGLs to be on teams. Now, when it comes down to this, right, we talk about the position, we talk about the ability to maybe not have an IGL or to maybe not have that veteran leader in the group. Could that be accomplished by a coach? Could that be accomplished by a substitute? I mean, if, let's say that some iteration of this roster exists, maybe you throw in an IGL into the starting lineup. I'd imagine, like I said, if this report is true, that they would all want to stick together. I don't think that one guy would just be like, yeah, I'll go over to the substitute position. It's not going to happen. So like I said, I think that for me, it's kind of, I'll say this. The way that people are comparing this team, I would say is somewhat accurate, but at the same time, you have to look at the guys on this roster in comparison to ones that we are bringing up from the past. And the one common thing, and I brought this up many, many times for rosters, like I said, in terms of the last few seasons, has been leadership, right? When you have a group of guys who all want to be on the same team with each other and are friends out of game, you have to be careful with that, because when it comes down to making the difficult decisions to even call out teammates from time to time to be a real teammate, sometimes you have to step on their toes, right? Sometimes you have to be real in certain spots, and at times, I'm not saying this roster will deal with this, but at times there have been rosters who are very similar to their, kind of identity and have had issues, right, in terms of making decisions, in terms of working together, right, as a team. They obviously are great teams, or rather teammates out of game, but when it comes to being in the end game, it can be some struggle times. And we've seen a lot of rosters start to fold. We've rather seen some teams who we thought would have fantastic expectations really kind of follow under those. And now I say all of that to now say this, right? I personally don't think that this team, if it does come about, will deal as much as people think with this issue. Now, from what I've seen, from what I've even heard players talk about in regards to these guys, is that they're very mature for their age, meaning that they are all about business, meaning that they want to get the games done. They want to try to be involved. They have been working for so long on their careers. They've been in the scene for a long time. Obviously, not necessarily as pros, as Priestahh, like we said, is the oldest by definition in terms of gameplay on this team. But they're very mature for their age, which I think is very important. I think that's for me the biggest aspect about this conversation is, I think leadership is needed for this team. Obviously, a coach will be inbound at some point. But I think that if they were to bring in this roster, I want to have a really good coach for this team. But I don't think that they will struggle as much as people think, maybe with the laziness or the lack of communication or the maybe awkwardness that could come with calling out teammates on this team. I think they are really good friends. I think they have great chemistry with each other, but I think that this team came together for a reason because these guys feel confident in each other's skill. They feel confident in each other's abilities. So I don't think these guys will get wrapped up in as many things as teams have in the past who have looked upon like this identical roster. Now, another position that people have kind of pointed out is, and I actually do understand this argument, is the pace of this team, right? Will this roster be too fast-paced for a slowed-down title? I think I saw, was it Formal, who kind of commented and said, hey, this is basically Call of Duty Ghosts 2. We know, right, in comparison to games like Call of Duty Ghosts, much slower gameplay, that certain players succeed over others. Modern Warfare has already, and based off the beta, we're learning more information each day about being a more slow title. You look at all 5 of these guys, and a majority of the time, you talk about speed being one of those characteristics. So would this team be too fast-paced for their own good? And I think that's a fair argument to bring up as of this moment. Will that affect them? We'll have to see. But I think that could be something that in the future could cause somewhat of a hindrance, right? Black Ops 4, super fast game. Search and Destroy worked differently. Hardpoint at times was incredibly chaotic in terms of how you utilize specialists, the way that you engaged on certain things. I think that Modern Warfare will look a lot different than that game, and there's already a lot of players speculating on how, hey, I'm back, right? A slower paced title. Here I am to slay. And like I said, that could be somewhat of an issue for these guys, maybe even off the rip. But the thing about this team that you have to consider is their ability to adapt. That was one thing that I really liked a lot about the old Elevate team. Prior to that, the old Team Revenge roster, when it came down to guys like Nagafin and Facento and whatnot, was those particular players' ability to adapt and to learn super early in the game how things work. And I think this team isn't necessarily identical to that roster, but I think could be in somewhat of a direct comparison by the way that they play the game, by the way they're not influenced based off of personalities or similar come-ups. They are all about learning the game, grinding it, and wanting to improve. So like I said, with that being said, if this roster does in fact form up, or if a core of it does, I think that they're very well set up as a team. I think they've got a great particular roster in place, and depending on how they deal with a few things that could be brought up, right, a few of the issues that we discussed could be a possibility. I think that they have a very good chance of being a super solid contender when it comes to franchising.